Hi, and welcome to our second lot of questions and answers from the Shipwrecks and Submerged World MOOC. As ever, we're going to keep this very informal, and we're working through questions that have come up through the comments section. So if yours isn't here and you would like to see it answered, please do feel free to repost it or to put a post on our blog asking for your question to be looked at. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tamsin, who's going to take us through the questions.
Okay, so our first question is from section 1.10, History of Maritime Archaeology. And Richard Yost asks, is there much interaction and collaboration between the Maritime Archaeology team and those working on Portus? And if so, what's been learned from such a collaboration? So if I start off with commenting on this one a little bit, in terms of creating the online courses with FutureLearn, there has been quite a lot of interaction between the two teams. So with what's going on behind the scenes, we've done quite a lot of work together. We've got the same film crew involved in those, staff like library staff, legal team and so on. So that's happening quite a lot. And we've also obviously looked at both of those courses to create links between them, whilst not trying to overlap too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And then sort of on a day-to-day basis, it may feel that we're two very separate entities, Portus and Shipwrecks in terms of maritime archaeology, but actually we're all in the same department. So my office is just a few doors down from Graham Earls and Simon Kay is around the corner, and we actually work together a lot on these subjects because obviously it's an artificial divide to say maritime archaeology and then Portus, the great imperial port of Rome, which is clearly a maritime thing in its own right. So actually, yeah, there's a lot of integration. We teach together and we work together all the time. So yeah, we're just giving you different windows onto the research that we do.
So the next question then is from Peter Probert. He said, I've often wondered about a related aspect to the salvage and treasure hunting aspect, which is what is the protection in place via UK ships which have been sunk in international waters. For example, HMS Repulse was sunk in the South China Sea with a large loss of life, but the UK legislation appears to cover UK waters only. Is there anything else in place to help protect against salvage operators, professional or amateur, in this respect? So, Rodrigo.
Yeah, well, this is a very complicated issue internationally because there are certain legal, let's call them like holes where illegal salvage can be still carried out. So, basically, there's a very big international law formulated by UNESCO in 2001, and they try to protect internationally all maritime cultural heritage, but they have to work in collaboration with local governments. So it depends on the context and it depends on the wreck. For example, you were talking about HMS Repulse. So that is a British shipwreck in Chinese waters. So the shipwreck belongs to the British state. And if it was in Chinese waters, let's say the continental platform that belongs to China, then you would have to look for a collaboration between the two countries, which is, well, what we're looking for in general in research. So it's not really about who the shipwreck belongs to. So it's because we have to work in teams, international teams. It's an important part. Collaboration is a key word. Anyway, if it was in international waters, then it doesn't. There's a small space where shipwreck hunting can be carried out, and we have to find a way of going against that.
So Rodrigo's absolutely right in that UNESCO is a convention that a number of countries have signed up to and it's now become ratified, but international waters beyond sort of territorial seas are a complicated space where people are free to operate, and so really it's about the principle which lies behind UNESCO that we would really drive, is that this is the world's heritage, it belongs to everyone, and therefore it should be treated with that same degree of responsibility and care, and that from our perspective, salvage for profit reduces people's accessibility to it and allows a few people potentially to benefit from using it as a resource in a very limited way. Whereas hopefully what you're getting from this module or this course is that the benefits we get from research really extend way beyond just the sort of monetary value that you might find. And also, extracting monetary value from wrecks is never straightforward, and a lot of salvage really struggles to deliver on these fronts, as you'll see in week 4.
Okay, so our next question then comes from Emily Ginder in New Jersey. And she says, how do we know the following? The first secure evidence of seafaring in the Mediterranean comes in the form of obsidian from the island of Melos found in Frankfurt Cave in Greece. How can you rule out a later time, like a traveller bringing home a souvenir from his travels?
Well, it's a really good question, and you've actually hit on something that we call in archaeology curation, which is that we can have on sites older materials, so something that dates to an earlier period, which has been curated and kept, and that may have become very, very precious and very, very important. So you are right that we do have older materials which appear on younger sites. However, there are ways in which we can identify this archaeologically. One of them is context, so what are the other things it's found with? So are we finding that obsidian blade with much later material? Okay, so how has it been found? With obsidian, we're also lucky that we can do a form of relative dating called obsidian hydration. So when you nap a fresh piece of obsidian, you expose the interior to the air and the moisture content, and actually it will begin to slowly absorb that moisture over time. And so that gives us a relative index of how long it's been exposed. So we can say how old the object is quite accurately, and then compare that to the material it's found alongside, which then helps us understand whether it's been curated, whether it's been found in situ at the time of deposition. So it is a really good question, and it's actually quite complicated to resolve. But yeah, it's something that we're really interested in archaeology, because we do like old things, and people in the past also like old things. So yeah, it's a tricky thing. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Fraser. So we're going to move on to some questions that specifically relate to week 2 now. So we're starting off with a question from Wendy Cooper. Do we have any evidence when and how shipbuilding developed from one man building his boat to the sophisticated types of craft seen by Roman times?
Yeah, I would like to answer that as well. Well, a ship, we have to think it's a very complicated artifact, so it's a combination of different technologies all come together. So it's very complicated to go from just a single ship being built to just very complex craft, and then it keeps on carrying out development throughout time. So, like any artifact, it just doesn't pass from one person to the other. It's a social process to actually build an artifact, and specifically a shipwreck, which is so complex. A ship, sorry, that is so complex. So, I don't know if you like to add something to that.
Well, a way that we like to think about these things is thinking in terms of communities of practice. So practice of boat building, but also peripherally, if that is a word, communities of practice around that, of blacksmiths, of woodsmen and people like that. And these all communicate with each other and work with each other within their own community of practice. And it's a way of building the ships, of course, but also to transmit the knowledge that is needed to build these ships. So you will have children in communities of practice, you will have adults and then elderly people, and your roles change throughout this community's practice throughout time, and you roll into it, and through practice, through actually doing the things from when you're a child onwards, you learn to make the shipbuilding trade your own, really.
And then you acquire the skill. Yeah,
you acquire the skill, and it is transmitted at the same time.
Yeah, completely. Yeah.
I suppose underlying that, as a prehistorian, I might say that the idea of sort of one man building his boat is an interesting idea. You may have had someone who was a specialist who came and built boats and things, or they may have been relatively straightforward, but exactly as someone's saying, it's been a socially embedded skill that actually proliferates out and incorporates lots of other people for a long time archaeologically. Therefore, you can see it sort of more as this organic process, really.
So the next question links in with that. It's about technology. So it says, the splitting of planks by wedge, while effective, left so much finishing work to be done by axe or adze, while the two-man saw was the technological advance for the time. So when were saws started to be used for the cutting of planks in the shipbuilding process? So, Tom.
So that's an interesting question, and actually it varies greatly through time and space again. So I can talk a bit about Northwest Europe, because that's sort of my area of expertise. So the saw was introduced by the Romans, but it also disappeared once the Romans left these parts, and people went back to splitting wood, and then it was gradually introduced again, but at different speeds in different places. So for example, we have some bits and pieces of wood in London from the early 13th century, which might have been sawn. We have some elements in the Magor boat from around 1275 that were sawn as well. But we really see it taking off at the continent in places like southern Denmark, Germany, and the northern part of the Netherlands, Friesland, and places like that, where the cogs are introduced, an entirely new ship type, and they use the saw to produce their planks and timbers. But then in northern Europe, the saw is introduced much later. People continue to use splitting of planks until, well, there are the exceptions, such as the Hedesby ship from, again, the late 13th century, which has some bits and pieces in it, but it's truly exceptional. The first shipwreck find is from Denmark, that we know that was completely made with sawn timbers of cross-cutting as the Bredfjed ship, and that dates to 1600. So we have a serious time gap in there. So that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So moving on to quite a different question now from Debbie Wareham in North Wales. International trade during the Bronze Age and the role that Cyprus played in the production of copper is really interesting. But I was wondering about the trade with Britain and export of copper from here at that time, such as the Great Orme copper mines in Llandudno, North Wales. It's always been of interest to understand where the local smelting sites were and how did they export the copper ore. As I understand, there was some small-scale local smelting carried out of low-grade copper ore and the rest was exported. The coastline was much further out during those times than today, and there are ancient tree moraines on the beaches, so boat building was possible. Also of interest was the exchange of ideas to develop copper mining in the first instance. Was there a steady movement of people and ideas who knew how to identify a source of copper within an area?
It sounds like we're starting every answer to every question with the same thing. This is a very good question, but it really is. And I would hate to give the impression as someone who studies sort of British prehistory that Cyprus was the only place that had importance in terms of copper, because no, you're absolutely right. The sources at the Great Orme were of great significance, and our sort of understanding of the map of the world during this time period changes when these resources become so important. So absolutely, it does become a really important place on the map in terms of its ability to contribute towards the construction of metal objects at this time. And the element of your question that you pose about were there people that knew how to identify a source of copper within an area is one of the big things that archaeology has been asking for a long time. Because there's obviously a point of transition, a change, when people began to realise that these minerals were apparent and that they could be sourced and they could be used. And how that knowledge moved, how metallurgy, understanding of metallurgy moved, is a very complicated thing to consider, and probably was one of these strange processes where there is movement of people that we know at that time and the movement of these wondrous new objects. We get a sense of some of that movement through what is effectively some of the earliest wreck evidence we have around Britain, the Moor Sands and Salcombe Bronze Age wrecks, where we have recovered bronze artefacts from the sea floor. There's a very good book which came out a couple of years ago now, which Stuart Needham edited, which I'd recommend to anyone who wants to read about it. But these are remarkable objects, and we see that some of these objects have travelled great distances across Europe as well. So there's a big network of people interested in metal production, about procuring these very, very limited resources really and enabling them to move across. In terms of the small scale smelting and identifying it, it's quite difficult because of the level of production at that time. So sometimes we're lucky, we do find sites where you find evidence of smelting, but these are relatively low level industrial sites, and so there's a bit of chance about encountering them. So I suppose it's a hard question to answer, but you're asking the same sorts of questions that we're still asking in archaeological research today. We can identify that the site was of incredible importance to the European metalwork industries at the period, but we need to do more research to understand the process of how it was identified and how that material was transported. And really that's what's so fascinating about this period.
Okay, so going back to shipbuilding now. Is it possible that clinker building resulting in less rigid hulls produced ships more suited to the larger waves that were more common in northern Atlantic waters? Okay, Tom.
So I think the whole idea of clinker building and less rigid hulls is slightly overstated, because basically you build your hull as rigid as you want. So clinker building does not necessarily imply that your hull will be less rigid or more flexible. It simply depends on how many frames you chose to put in your vessel. But this question often comes from Viking ships, for example, which are very, very flexible. And if you look at some of the videos from the Viking Ship Museum and the way that they bounce around the waves, you can see that they warp a lot, but they warp sort of in a longitudinal way. But that's a byfactor, really, of the fact that they were built so light. So the frames that were put in there, in that 28-meter long ship really fit into sort of this sort of space. So because they are so light, they become much more flexible as well, and they work well within the waves. Of course, there's a certain break-off point there, but that definitely was not reached with Viking ships.
Yeah, but it reaches a limit, definitely.
It reaches a limit, yeah.
And you can see the Grastia, it's probably the major limit of clinker-built construction, yeah.
In terms of size,
maybe.
maybe.
Of size, yeah. Well,
it's something we don't really know, but you will read about that in week 4. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting discussion about if she was seaworthy or not.
Yeah.
Okay, so then another question here from Dave Hall. From this introduction, it seems that the course focuses on the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, and I'm wondering about open water links within Britain. I'm aware of 2 Bronze Age ships that have been found in Britain, and I suspect that there were regular shipping routes between Britain and Europe. There were links between Britain and Europe in the Iron Age, but I'm not sure if any ships have been found. These links definitely exist in the Roman period, but I'm not aware of the types of ships used. Therefore, I'd be interested to know if these ships were the same as those used in other areas, or were they different?
There's an awful lot tied up in that question, and it relates to some strange peculiarities in the archaeological record. In that you're absolutely right. We have this sort of fluorescence of Bronze Age boats, these sewn plank boats that we know from Dover and places like Ferriby, which are really interesting and give us insights into the sorts of vessels that we think we know. The sorts of vessels which are used in that period. And there's a debate about whether they're sea-going or they're for inland waterways. And I'm more on the side of, if you want to, you can take pretty much anything out onto the North Sea and English Channel if you're feeling brave enough. But we can leave that for a side. There's then a very strange gap in the archaeological record, and this may relate to where boats have been deposited or the types of construction features, and basically our chances of encountering them on the British side. So we have very little in the way of Iron Age seafaring material until we come to the later sort of interaction at the beginning of the Roman period, realistically. Now, this is different when you go across onto the continent, so we do have an idea of Iron Age boat building traditions there. So up in Denmark we have things like the Hjortspring boat and so on, which give us some insights into sort of the canoe type vessels. But the strange thing is, as soon as we reach sort of the just about pre-Roman Iron Age, we get a sense of much larger vessels coming in then. Really quite considerable ones such as Blackfriars. Then is it the Guernsey wreck as well, puts us in around about the same sort of period. So we get these hints, and we always have historical accounts from the same time which talk about different types of vessels. But we don't have enough of them, quite frankly, particularly when it comes back to Britain. We can see the materials moving, but not the actual boats that move them. So it's always posed this big question as to, were they like the ones we find on the continent, or were they like our Bronze Age sewing boats, or were they something completely different and made of different materials which we now can't or aren't surviving in the archaeological record? So that's a long-winded way to say that we sort of know the before and after, but there's a chunk of time in the middle that we're not really sure about, if we're entirely honest.
Okay, thank you. So we're going back now to the blog. We had a question posed on the blog by Mark saying, does the same tool leave different marks in different types of wood? So this relates to your blog post, Thomas.
Yeah, it does. And the answer is quite simple, yes. It does leave different marks on different kinds of woods depending on hardwoods or softwoods and things like that. But yeah, but they are still within the same, similar enough that we can see it's the same tool that is being used on different kinds of woods. Yeah.
Okay, so then our final question comes from Gwendolyn Yeager, who's a high school student, and she said she's going to be teaching a lesson on marine archaeology next week and was wondering if you had any tips for her or could do a brief summary of the most interesting aspects of the course for a high schooler. So it's a really interesting question there, and I'm going to chip in first of all because it's such a vast topic. I think it depends on how long you're going to be speaking for, Gwendolyn. As you can see, we've quite easily filled 4 weeks, and we've got the blog and these video posts taking up additional time. So I think narrowing it down really to think about what you want to try and cover and how long your presentation is, we're guessing it's maybe 15 minutes, is going to be a really good starting point. And then maybe think about which aspects of this course you've enjoyed most as to where you want to start with your presentation. And I think, Rodrigo, you had some thoughts.
Well, yeah, I think you can go 2 ways. You can give a general presentation of what maritime archaeology is about, or you can just pick a single case study and go with that. You can probably just present something about the Mary Rose, for example, or just pick whatever you really want, get enthusiastic about it, and try to make people engage with what you're talking about.
Absolutely, and it sounds like you've got the enthusiasm for it from the way you're writing in your message. So that's a really good starting point. Good. And to pick up on both what Tamsin and Rodrigo said, is one really nice thing you can do is to unpack something like a present. So the beautiful thing about some of the shipwrecks we have from the ancient and medieval world is that people think they're just about a boat. But when you begin to take it apart, you have the technology, you have the materials that are moving, but bound up in all of that is an understanding of the people and that aspect of history that we sometimes lose about what their lives were like on a daily basis and how those broader social networks worked. So, as an archaeologist, if I was being really mean, I'd say within that single wreck, you've got that glimpse into that really intense and vibrant moment of what life was like in those periods. And those things allow us to understand the trajectory of humanity in a way that's completely different to anything else. So it's very biased, but definitely.
Well, and if you're a diver or a sailor, bring over some stuff and you can talk about your own experience with the sea as well. I think it's very important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that has been another informal question and answer session. We hope you found it useful. If we haven't answered your question, do feel free to give us a nudge and ask that you'd really like it to be answered, and we will try our best. As you'll see again, not all of them are actually answerable because archaeology isn't all known and discovered. That's what makes it exciting, is we still have a lot of research to do. And you'd be amazed that actually a lot of things which you think, oh, I shouldn't ask that because they must have done that or it must have been resolved years ago, actually probably still a valid question and something that may promote people to think in a different way. So thank you very much, and we'll look forward to doing this again next week.